Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that you could join us in this conversation that we're going to have, which came together very quickly as an informal effort from a group of people who just wanted to find a way to support federal workers at this very difficult time. I'm Gina Cox. I'm an organizational psychologist. I've been one for many years, and for more than 20 years, I have advised business executives about organizational culture, leader effectiveness, and employee experience. And so, this challenge, this issue that you are dealing with, is one that is near and dear to my heart. And so, I just wanted to offer whatever I could to help you get through this difficult time. I will be introducing you very soon to the other colleagues who are participating in this webinar as experts who are, like me, just going to be sharing their expertise. And it's really, I want you to know that the reason that we're doing this is truly as an effort to support you. We're not going to give you any legal advice because, of course, we think you need to make your own decisions and you need to talk to professionals to get the right answers. But we just wanted to give you some context to help you think about the issues that you should consider as you make big decisions about this fork in the road memo. So, with me on this call, the first person I'd like to introduce is Robbie Samuels. Robbie Samuels is somebody who is a virtual event design consultant. He is an executive Zoom producer. He's the one that is going to make this session work well for you so that you can understand everything that we're trying to convey. He is an openly transgender owner of a certified LGBT business enterprise. And we're really delighted that he has volunteered his time to support this effort today. Thank you, Robbie. Next, I'm going to introduce you to Minnie Lau. Minnie is a CPA with a tax firm that services clients for over a decade. Interestingly, early in her career, she worked at the IRS and has been furloughed. She's had the experience of being furloughed. And so she understands this issue not just from the perspective of someone who's a tax expert, but as someone who has lived this kind of experience. And Minnie, we're really delighted that you agreed to join us and share your perspective. And now I also want to introduce Roberta Matchison. Roberta is the president of Madison Consulting and the author of 7 books on talent and leadership. She's a LinkedIn top voice and the former HR careers expert for Monster.com. As part of her consulting practice, she coaches job seekers who are looking to dramatically accelerate their job search and land jobs sooner rather than later. So you can see why her particular expertise might be useful as you think about some of the criteria you should consider as you make this really big decision. I mentioned before that I'm an organizational psychologist. And so I'm going to jump right into talking a little bit about the context, where are we now, the state of the state, if you would, as we transition from introductions to talking about some of the ideas that we wanted to share with you. And so the reality is that we are in a situation that is something that you've never experienced before. The federal government has had a program of buyouts that does exist, but this particular program, this fork in the road program, is not a buyout. Even some people will be using the language of buyout. This is not a buyout. And it doesn't have defined within the documents that have been shared by the Office of Personnel Management anything that suggests that this is the kind of situation where you can be guaranteed that you're going to have any kind of particular financial outcome on the other side. All we know is what is in that email and what is in the landing page and the FAQ that has been provided related to it. And you've got to make your decision very quickly by February 6th. And so one of the things that I did was I spoke to several employment law attorneys, employee side employment lawyers who have shared their advice or their guidance to help you think about some of the things that you could think through. Because what's really important is that the letter and the landing page and the FAQ, all of the language is written in such a way that it doesn't have very much clarity. It's pretty difficult to figure out exactly what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. And so the lawyers really suggest that in a situation like that, it's really best to do nothing, right? Best to not quit your job and take the risk that you interpreted something that turns out not to be the reality of this situation. The other thing that they point out is that some of the way that this has been handled is very different than typical Office of Personnel Management process, so the typical change management process where you have FAQs up front, all the managers are briefed about how to answer the questions that you might raise. And so everybody's in lockstep as you go through a pretty standard process. Because there is no standard process, what that means is that you have to ask more questions, seek out more answers, rather than assuming that anything that you know or think you know is the reality of the situation. And the other thing that we have learned from talking to employees who've been affected by this letter is that some people feel personally anxious and fearful about what does this mean, not just for your career, but for your longer term future, for what it would be like to work with your colleagues. And specifically, for example, working with your manager, we've heard in some cases where managers aren't giving you much information. And the one thing the lawyers have said is, if your manager isn't giving you much information, try not to hold that against your manager. The reason your manager might not be giving you much information is, number one, they don't necessarily have much more information than you. The other reason is because this letter and the guidance is unclear, they can't commit to anything because they don't necessarily know what the rules of engagement are. So while it may seem that your manager might be behaving a little bit differently than they did in the past, lawyers that I've spoken to are saying, don't take this personally. They're just trying to make sure that they don't make the situation worse by promising you something or agreeing on something and then discovering that it's really not the case. And we recognize that this is the kind of situation where emotions would be very high. From the bigger picture perspective, before we get into more specifics, I think that one important piece of guidance that we wanted to share is that this is a time where it's best to do as little as possible in terms of acting, but gather as much information as you can and try to remain as calm as you can in a situation where you can't predict the outcome. Get as many pieces of information as you can get before you make the decision. And then if there's a chance that you don't have to resign, to avoid doing that, because the best thing that you could do probably would be absolutely nothing at this particular point in time. So right now, I'm going to transition to talking to my colleague, Minnie, to whom you've already been introduced. And I'm going to ask Minnie to just share her one big tip, but also to provide some information about the context of this situation from her perspective. I've mentioned before that she's got previous experience with IRS, as well as her tax advising. Minnie?
Thank you so very much, Gina, for that lovely introduction. And I am so honored to be speaking to you and all the folks that are listening in today. First and foremost, I want to relate to you guys that this must be a really confusing time. And it is okay to acknowledge that this is a really confusing time. It is pretty impossible for somebody like me to be able to give advice that is going to work equally well for everybody listening to this broadcast today. So I want to be very clear in that please make sure before you make any decisions based on what you've heard on this broadcast today that you compare this to your own personal circumstances in making an informed decision. But there are a few things that we'll get into during later in this broadcast. My personal experience with this is take a moment to reevaluate what your personal financial circumstances are. Not making a decision is a valid decision based on the information that's been shared with you today. That being said, there may be a subset of you where continuing return to office is just not going to work, and therefore you need to seriously consider what they're offering you here. My biggest tip that I would like to share today is for those of you who are participating in the thrift savings plan, which is the retirement plan for the majority of the employees in the federal government today. You do not need to make a decision on pulling out money on your retirement. You have all the time in the world to make decisions with regards to what you wish to do with your annuity payments. Do not roll anything out of your retirement. Take a moment. Everything is going to be okay. The federal government is not going to kick you out of your own retirement plan. There are many people who have left federal service decades later and is still on the thrift savings plan, one of the best retirement plans on the face of planet Earth. So if there's one tip I would like to share today is don't mess with a good thing. Don't touch the TSP today, and just take a deep breath and hopefully take some information that we're sharing today to make your own personal decisions. And good luck.
Mm. That's fantastic, Minnie. And I certainly concur. I think the one thing specific in the guidance you're offering in terms of your expertise, but the thing that you have said that is very similar to what I was talking about earlier is this notion of don't necessarily have to do anything. Perhaps doing nothing would be the best action. So now I'm going to ask my colleague, Roberta Matchison, the similar question. If she would share a little bit about this context from the perspective of her expertise and share one tip, her best tip that she wants you to remember.
Thank you, Gina. I'm sorry that we all have to meet under these circumstances. However, this is a very important discussion that we're having. And I'm going to go against the tide a little bit because everybody so far has said you don't need to do anything. And I don't agree. You need to do something. You need to do something whether you decide to stay, whether you decide that you are going to leave, or if you're in the middle of this fork in the road. And by that, you need to put yourself in a position that if tomorrow you are not given this choice and you are told you are not staying, you are in a much better position than today. So my best number one tip for all of you is to forget about, okay, I made a decision, great, I don't have to do anything. I would advise you to immediately get your resume in order, get your LinkedIn profile up to date, and get your network going.
Oh, wow, Roberta, that is a fantastic tip. And I don't mind that you're saying that something that sounds a little bit like different than what we said before, although the two things are very complementary. But in your specific experience and in your domain, which has to do with career guidance, you're reminding everyone that regardless of what happens, they have an opportunity to take control of their destinies by doing some of these very specific things like loading up their resumes and their LinkedIn profiles and so on, so that they can have a sense of controlling how they want the rest of the world to see them in case they need to seek another career opportunity. I think that is fantastic advice. Thank you, Roberta. And so now that we've had these best ideas that we hope you don't forget, what we'd like to do now is to move to a Q&A. And in this Q&A, you'll be seeing Minnie and Roberta, but now I'm going to be asking them some specific questions that I think might be on your mind as well. So I'm going to start with Minnie. And Minnie, just remind us again, what are the general topics you are going to cover in this Q&A?
The three main things I would like to talk to you about today is what the tax ramifications would be if you opted to accept this offer. If you were to accept this offer and you subsequently ended up working in the private sector, what tax ramifications should you consider? The second thing I would love to talk a bit more about is what can you do with your thrift savings plan if you actually choose to take this offer? Can you stay? Do you need to go? That's the second thing I would like to talk about. And lastly, to talk about if you choose not to take this offer, what could potentially happen if the government were to reduce your position?
Thank you very much for orienting us, Minnie, because I think your advice is going to be very valuable. And so I'd like to start with that first question. What are the tax ramifications that a person should consider who has received this offer from the Office of Personnel Management?
If based on that particular memo that went out with the fork in the road, one of the FAQ questions they asked was, if you are able to find separate employment will they continue to pay out these benefits between now and September 30th? And the answer was a resounding yes. You are allowed to work. That being said, the second job that you, or the succeeding job that you may end up, working for, has no clue that you are receiving benefits still from the federal government. And as such, if you're working a replacement job while you're receiving these benefits, you may be in a higher tax bracket than you were planning on being previously. And even for those who are accustomed to having break even or even slight refunds in filing their taxes every year, should be a little bit mindful in that having this additional source of revenue might push you into a higher tax bracket, and that the amount of taxes withheld on jobs number 1 and 2 by themselves or may not be sufficient to get you all the way there. The last thing I would want is for someone in that kind of position to have a unexpected tax bill when they file their taxes the subsequent year. So something to be mindful of if they are choose to take this path and finding a second position.
Mhm. Thank you for that. That's great advice. Just a quick question. Where would I go to get the advice that I might need if I want to explore this issue more?
There are a lot of information available on irs.gov, actually. The Internal Revenue Service has a lovely calculator that you can actually use by inputting the amount of income you're expected to receive, along with your filing status, how many children you may have, what other deductions you may be entitled to, and they can actually help you calculate or reconfigure your withholding in your second job so that you are not caught unaware of this tax discrepancy. So the irs.gov is a wonderful place to start. For those of you that are using tax preparers, and tax season just started last week, this is an excellent question. You may wish to run that through with your tax professional. They may be able to custom tailor a calculation for your own specific situation. For those that don't have tax professionals, irs.gov. For those that do, absolutely check with your tax professional. They may be able to assist you.
Minnie, would you be willing to put a link to that calculator in our resources document? So I have a second question for you, Minnie. What if I have a retirement plan, a thrift savings plan right now from the federal government? What do I do in this situation?
What, and you asked us of 10 different CPAs, and we will give you 10 different answers. But the answer is it really depends on the person that I am advising. What age group are they in? How much are they making prior to separating with the federal government? Is there a spouse involved that also has supplemental income coming in? The takeaway, like I said from my first tip, is you do not need to make a decision on withdrawing your retirement from the thrift savings plan, even if you are to make this decision and take this separation agreement. I strongly advise everyone who are contemplating accepting this offer to leave their thrift savings plan alone for 3 to 6 months while you decide what you need to do. After all, you're still being paid for the next 3 to 6 months if you choose to accept this offer. And for those of you that are still staying with the federal government, you wouldn't be taking money out of your thrift savings plan anyway. My suggestion is every single family has their own particular tax situation. You do not need to be making drastic moves with your retirement plan as you are making this decision. As I said previously, there are plenty of alumni of the federal government who are still happily holding their retirement savings in the thrift savings plan. It's one of the best managed plans that is out there with very low investment in expense ratios. Performs actually quite a bit better than some privately held retirement plans, but not that I'm trying to plug the thrift savings plan or anything like that.
Minnie, that's great advice. And what I hear you saying loud and clear is that it's complicated and that people should recognize that there are many different variables that ought to be considered before they make the decision, just with regard to the tax implications and just with regard to the thrift savings accounts. The last question I wanted to run by you, Minnie, is this one. What if I don't take the offer and my job gets eliminated, my position gets eliminated? What are the implications of that from your perspective?
This is a fascinating question because the answer I have for somebody living in one state could be very different than the answer I could have from somebody living at the opposite side of the country. And the reason being is one of the questions that was posed in the FAQ section of this Fork in the Road memo actually said, if I do not take this offer, and what happens after if I wish to take this offer later? And I believe the answer was this will no longer be, based on what they wrote, is this is probably not going to be available, which means in a situation that happened to me a long time ago when I was furloughed with the federal government, I was receiving benefits from what the state of California, because I'm a California girl, was willing to provide. And that amount of assistance is limited by how much the state of California was willing to offer at that period in time. There is also a waiting period before you're eligible for unemployment, where if you believe that there is a realistic possibility that your position could still be eliminated, you may wish to consider a stronger argument of potentially taking this offer. Again, not making the decision for the folks that are listening on this broadcast, in that by taking this offer, you at least have a consistent income between now and the end of September, after which state unemployment benefits will then kick in, extending your period of assistance. So something to be mindful of for those who might not be able to physically return to the office, or those who are looking after loved ones who that you just can't go back to the office for one reason or another. The length of assistance, you really should be looking at what your state unemployment will offer in that situation. You may end up with potentially more assistance by taking this offer now. However, no one really knows what positions will end up being eliminated. And the last thing I want to say is, hey, please take this offer because you're worried your position is going to be eliminated. It could very well be that your position may not be eliminated. So I want to caution, only a very small subset of people may need to seriously consider take this offer for one reason or another that they cannot return back to the office.
Mm-hmm. And Minnie, what I heard you say, apart from very specific guidance there, is that, again, this is one of those situations where it's case by case basis. Just because you might have a friend, you're discussing this issue with your friend, and then you might not realize you and she are he are in very different situations. So you've got to keep your particular situation in mind. And I'm really pleased that we'll be able to share this with other people. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And so now I'm going to bring our colleague Roberta back to the screen. Roberta has already been introduced to you before, and you know that she is a career expert. Roberta, what is your general statement about the topic that you want to discuss before I get into asking you some specific questions?
Gina, I'd like to really talk about the state of the current job market, and I'd like to share some observations in terms of how different the job search is today than perhaps many people who are listening or watching today have experienced. Because typically when you're in the government, those of you who are working in government, you tend to stay in your jobs a lot longer Some of you may be career government employees, so this whole job search thing is totally new to you. And then I want to talk about what it might feel like if you decide to stay, or if you have to stay, what the environment might feel like. What is it going to be icky at work, or is it going to be fun, or is it going to be a combo?
This is fantastic. It's an angle I had not thought about until we started preparing for this session. So let's just jump right in. I want to ask you, what is the job market like today?
For all workers, and that's really who you're competing for jobs for, right? Because many of you will not go back into federal jobs because many of those jobs will no longer be in existence. So you will be out on the open market and you will be competing with people who have worked in private industry for years. And those people are having a very hard time landing jobs today. I would say I do a lot of job search coaching, and I'm telling my clients 9 months, a year. And if you land a job sooner, good for you. And of course, that is going to depend on your level, right? What kind of job you're looking for. But it is unlike any other environment that I have ever seen, and it's tough. So you have to be prepared for that. And that's why I'm saying, even if you decide you're going to stay, and then you're like, ugh, it's not really very pleasant here these days, you want to start your engines now. You don't want to start warming up 6 months from now and saying, yeah, maybe I'll start looking for a job, because it will take a while.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I had no idea that it was taking that long for people to get a job. So that is absolutely great advice. What about the actual searching process? Let's say I've been happily employed for the last 8 years, and now I might find myself in a situation where I have to do a new job search. What's different? What's new since I last looked for a job?
Oh boy, there's this thing called AI, artificial intelligence, and it is rocking the job search world, and not in a good way. And so what is happening now, first of all, a good majority of the job activity is happening on LinkedIn. And I know there's a lot of you that are probably not even on LinkedIn. First and foremost, get your profile up, and you can look for free YouTube videos and lots of free advice out there on how to maximize your profile, because today everything is all about key search words. So if you don't have those keywords in your LinkedIn profile or in your resume, you're not going to get past these applicant tracking systems. And everybody's using AI, and AI is using those words. So it is not back in the day when you mailed a resume and somebody actually read it.
That's a significant difference. And people will then, based on your advice, then know that they need to have a LinkedIn profile, for example, or in whatever resume they create, they need to be thinking about what are the keywords. And I'll pitch in and say that from my IO psychology perspective, when I think about keywords, I guess there are two ways to think about them. There are keywords that are words are things that are in demand, things that employers might be looking for. And then there are probably keywords that have to do with your key knowledge, skills, and abilities, and other characteristics that you want other people to know that you possess. So when you think about these keywords, don't constrain yourself too much. Think about it from both sides, though. What are employers looking for? And then what are the particular knowledge, skills, and abilities that you might choose to showcase? This is great advice, Roberta. Thank you.
Gina, the other thing I want to add that a lot of people don't, again, even people who have been job searching don't realize, is that now there's these buttons called Easy Apply, right? And so hundreds and hundreds of people are applying for jobs that they may not be qualified for. So this is really taxing human resource professionals and hiring managers. Instead of, again, in the old days, maybe getting 100, 200 resumes, they're getting thousands. And I'm not meaning to alarm people, but that's why you really, the one thing that has not changed is the best way to get a job is through your network. That has not changed.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Great advice. I'm glad that I'm not going to be taking a spot away from somebody else who's going to be looking for one of these jobs. So what steps should I be taking right now? What are some of the steps that I should be considering right now, regardless of whether I resign or choose to stay? I think you've mentioned some already, but are there others that things you want me to do right now?
Yes, I would like you right now to make a list of everyone, and I would like you to start, even if it's just 2 or 3 people a week, just sending them a personalized message via email, if your friends text. And I'd like you to start getting your network greased and just reconnecting with people and asking them how they're doing. Do not ask them for a job. Just start to build that relationship back up that may have fallen to the side over the last 2, 3, 10 years. Because these are the people who are going to be able to help you land your next role.
That's fantastic. So start that networking right away. So my last question for now, Roberta, is I've been thinking that maybe this is an opportunity for self-employment. It's something that I had long considered and had never done. Maybe I want to become a consultant or some kind of advisor. Should I be considering self-employment now?
If you have the financial resources to be in this game, because as Gina, it is a long game. You might get lucky and land a client on day one, but for the most part, it's going to take a while. It could take 6 months, a year, 2 years. Maybe you're fortunate in that your partner has a full-time job with great benefits and you can take this risk. I don't see things changing much in the environment in terms of companies continuing to shed jobs. And the best way to protect yourself is to be independent, if that is a possibility for you.
Mhm. That self-employment thing is a big decision that requires not just expertise, but a certain kind of emotional resilience and a particular mindset in order to be able to do it. So it won't be an easy transition, certainly. And I think your advice is fantastic. Thank you so much, Roberta. I'm just going to take a few minutes now to add a couple of pointers that before we get into our general Q&A session, I just want to add a couple of pointers that have specifically to do with the environment. One of the things I'm always very interested in is organizational culture. And what we know from the research is that at a time like this, it is very likely that you're going to be feeling a sense of fear, anxiety, maybe even a loss of identity or the risk of a loss of identity because your whole career has had some particular characteristics and now everything is being jumbled and you cannot predict the future. So one thing I would say is if you feel those things, you're not alone probably. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself. You should probably expect that there will be some emotional challenges that you're going to have to deal with over the next many months. And the people around you, your colleagues, your loved ones, are going to also be having these sort of emotional experiences because of the unpredictability and uncertainty. And so one thing I did want to suggest with regard to that is if you haven't already, take advantage of your employee assistance program if you feel that you need some support. Sometimes you just need the EAP for someone to talk to. This is a good time to take advantage of any resources that you have that can help you to figure out not only what you're feeling, but how to deal with that so that it doesn't become an additional source of stress that you have because you have no support. So don't forget the EAP. And later on, I'll talk about resources, but if you need to find a therapist or a psychologist, there are also ways to find those kinds of people too. So the thing I wanted to say about this is if you are starting to feel that the emotional roller coaster that we know from psychology can come with these kinds of situations, you're not the only one. It's perfectly normal, but you got to do some self-care and don't be reluctant to do some self-care, even if it's just talking to a friend about the challenges that you're having, because this is a very big deal. The other thing I wanted to mention is that from research in psychology, and from my own personal experience advising organizations, we know that at times like these, after February 6th, some things will change. The majority of people will still probably be doing the jobs they were doing before, but regardless, because of the way this whole thing has been rolled out, there is now going to be this general sense of what's going on, and everything will probably be amplified because there's so much doubt and uncertainty. And so one of the things I wanted to say to you about this particular issue is to remember that people in the whole ecosystem with whom you interact might behave a little bit differently. And what you just need to remember is that too would be normal. It's because there is so much change in the system. It has all happened so rapidly. People are going to have to find new ways of relating. So help where you can, but don't be alarmed if you see new behaviors that you had not seen before, including new behaviors from your manager or other people who have some authority. That is just something for you to think about as you prepare yourself for this situation. And as Roberta said, not to scare you, but just to be realistic about the fact that we're all humans, and these kinds of situations are very challenging for us humans. All right. So now we're going to transition to a broader conversation, a conversation with everybody on the panel in the room at the same time, where we're going to tackle just some questions that we haven't yet had the opportunity to ask, but that we have some time, maybe about 10 minutes or so, in which we'll be able to talk about the things that we haven't yet previously discussed. And I have this one question that I wanted to ask about the whole job search thing. I was really interested. So there are many federal employees. I'm not the only one. And so do you think that employers in the private sector are interested in in hiring me coming out of the public sector? I'm going to ask this question of Roberta and Minnie. I'd love to hear your perspective as well afterwards.
That's a great question. And if I were in this situation, I would look at defense contractors. They're always looking for people who have government experience, right? So I would even use AI to my advantage, and I would go on and use ChatGPT or use Perplexity, and I would ask for a list of employers in my area. I would tell it what my area was, who oftentimes hire former federal employees. Because I happen to know, like even in DC, I was working with a client who's having a really tough time finding people with clearance. Many of you who are listening in have clearance, high levels of clearance. So you would be much more appealing for a particular job than, say, somebody from the private sector who would have to go through that whole process. So that's what I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Roberta. And Minnie, did you want to offer any comment with regard to this question?
So as a person who has left federal service into private sector life, I can say that, yes, the clearance thing is a really big one. There have been positions where they say, hey, you should be a US citizen too, because there could be security things that we need to clear. And by nature of you being a federal employee, they've already know the T's have been crossed and the I's are dotted. So that actually absolutely works. Another sector that federal employees should absolutely look into is in education. Higher education. There's a lot of administrative positions that are also available in that sector that kind of mirrors the lifestyle of those that work for the federal services. And that's another area that absolutely can be considered. My personal firm, when we actually hire employees, we look very highly on candidates that come from the Internal Revenue Service. After all, is knowing the system inside out is extremely helpful in the process. Sometimes it's as simple as, oh, I don't know where to find something, and having one of my staff telling me, I know exactly where we need to go. And if I don't, I can find a person who can tell me exactly where I need to go. Those resources are like lots of value there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you both. Another question that we have has to do with the people who might now find themselves in a situation where they have to come back to the office. So I just wanted to ask this question. I've not worked in the office for the last 5 years. There was a pandemic, or there are a variety of reasons why, but now my whole life has been built around working from home. And now I'm being asked to come back to the office, and I have no choice. And so I wanted to ask about what are some tips that you might offer for a person who is making that transition. And I'll start by offering a couple, because I have done some advising in this area. And one of the things that I wrote an article that really I had my daughter in mind as she had to make this kind of transition. And I said to her, treat this like a sort of a new job situation, because even though you might have worked with the same colleagues before and you've worked with them remotely, now that you're physically in the same space, the dynamic is going to amazingly feel very different. And so I said, pretend like this is a new job, show up and do your best first impression kind of stuff that you would do, which is dress for the situation. Don't try to take the habits that you were using at home if they're not appropriate and bring them into the office. The office is not going to adapt to you. You set a standard that lets everybody understand who you are now in this physical space. That's an example. That's one little example of something that I advise people to do as they make a transition like this. But Minnie and Roberta, but I'll start with you, Minnie. Do you have any suggestions for a person who's making this transition?
First and foremost, for somebody who also has been working remote since the pandemic, so I think I'm with Miss Gina here in the no longer needing to go into the office. The first thing everyone should be looking into is budgeting. There are now an outpouring of expenses you might not have incurred in the last couple of years where you are incurring now. Just speaking personally, if I had to go back to the office, the first thing I would be looking at is gas, tolls, public transit. Check to see if your federal service package allows you to prepay for some of these items with pre-tax dollars. Other things you may wish to look at is daycare expenses. Maybe you're now paying for aftercare for your kids because now you're unable to work from home. Those could potentially be tax deductible depending on your family situation. Similarly, with looking after the needs of your elderly loved ones. Sometimes when we talk about care, it's not just on small children. Your older dependents also may need you. Having to put them in situations where you need to potentially bring in outside help to look after your loved ones so you can actually go to work. All those could potentially be an itemized deduction if your taxes warrant you to be itemizing. So start tracking how you are spending your money. And for those of you who are taking advantage of this deferred resignation, don't think of this money as we're just an average normal Monday. You may wish to start paring back on some non-essentials to just be prepared for what if you're unable to find that next position. Like Ms. Roberta was saying, the job market now may take a little longer than what you were previously accustomed to. Tracking your expenses and having the ability to potentially reduce your cash outflow is going to keep you in a place of control, which right now feels out of control. And by being able to keep track of your finances, that takes hopefully one piece of anxiety off of your plate.
Oh, that is such great advice, Minnie. Thank you so very much. I'm going to go now to Roberta with the same question.
I think you can use this situation to your advantage. Many of us have been home for a long time, and there is that saying, out of sight, out of mind, right? And my advice would be to go in there and not just go into your cubicle or your office and close the door and sit in there for 8 hours, 10 hours a day. It's to just get out and to start having conversations and be visible and be known to the people who are making the decisions in terms of who else might be retained in the future and who will not. If people don't know who you are, it's very easy for them to dismiss you. And I do mean dismiss, because it's like, Gina, we can take her and put her on that list. The other thing that I think is important, because it's not all doom and gloom here, is that there will be many people taking this offer. And that means that there will be opportunities for many of you to step up. And so if you see an opportunity, if a position is vacated, don't wait to be tapped on the shoulder like, oh, would you like to apply? Go to your boss and tell him or her, you want this new job. Because when all is said and done, you might even come out better in the end than you ever imagined that things could go for you.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's great advice, Roberta. I think the one thing that we're all saying as well, in addition to the specific things that you've already offered, is that there's a lot of change. And so you have an opportunity to use that change. Though this is not a situation you would have wanted or asked for, you do have an opportunity to sort of mold this challenging situation to your advantage. So to look for the opportunities to network and build new relationships, including with your manager and other decision makers. You have an opportunity to make a new sort of first impression that might wow people. They had no idea how fabulous you were, or they've forgotten how fabulous you were. The other thing I thought about for sure is I love the idea that there might be more opportunity, as Roberta said. You might have more opportunity to step up into a situation where there's now a void. The other side of that is that sometimes in situations like these, you might be in a situation where you're here, but several of your former coworkers are no longer here for a variety of reasons. And we know as well that in a situation like that, there's a certain level of guilt that you might feel just because of your concern about the people who are no longer here, worrying about them. And of course, you're worrying about yourself too. There are some huge additional emotional ramifications that you will experience in this period after February 6th that you can start thinking about. But the good news, I think, from all of our panelists is that you can turn that challenge into a real win, a real opportunity. When Minnie talked about the financial aspect of this, like the additional expenses you might have and the care that you might need to take with budgeting, I thought that was such a fabulous suggestion, because it's not that you wouldn't be thinking about that at all, but you might not be thinking about it in the very purposeful way that I've heard Minnie describe it. And no wonder, given her background, I think what she's saying is this is a time to really be thoughtful and planful. And that the money, even if, let's say you happen to be one of those people who took this offer, it's not a windfall. It's not a windfall. It's not, oh, now I can just relax between now and September. It's an opportunity to plan for the longer term. So thank you, Roberta and Minnie. This has been fantastic. And so we've gotten now to the point where it's time for our wrap up. The time has flown by. We wanted to keep this to an hour to make sure that we didn't take up too much of your time, but yet shared some good ideas with you. So I want to thank you for joining us on this webinar. It's been our honor to just offer some tips from our professional experiences and our personal experiences. And I want to let you know that you can also go to @yourcivilservice.com to get additional resources that we have already prepared and future resources that we will be adding to that site, @yourcivilservice.com. Additionally, if you would like to contact any of our panelists, at the bottom of the resources page, you will find our contact information so you can know a little bit about us and get in touch with us. And we'd hope that you will share with us the ideas that you have about things you'd like for us to discuss in the future. And we would be happy to see if we can pull together other experts from our network to answer your questions. Thank you so very much for joining us. And the other thing is just to simply say that it is an honor to have this opportunity to work with Robbie, Minnie, and Roberta. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in any future sessions that we're able to pull together.